Wonderful. That's good to hear. That's all that matters, right? Right. I got my coffee.
Is this just one or is this all of the replacements? Okay, thank you. And I studied them, now I'm gonna research them. Oh, that's the one, 6. 7.
Well, it appears that it is 6 p.m. and we have a majority of our board members, so I would like to call to order the 16th regular meeting of the Board of Directors. And if Richard would be willing to lead the pledge, I would appreciate it.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Marine assures me that these microphones are adjusted to a comfortable level, so if anyone is finding an uncomfortable level, please let me know. I'm sure we can adjust. This one is a fairly simple on-off button, so in theory I should be able to manage that this evening. We'll see how that works. So our first order of business for tonight would be to act on the minutes of March 18th. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, we accept those under general consent. Yes.
Betsy, thank you. There are no communications, however, I have an adjustment to the budget work session, and that would be that before we begin 1.1, that business managers be allowed to review the updated revenue sheet as well as the prepaid list and talk a little bit further about the savings in diesel.
Thank you. So clearly I changed the other microphones, but mine is fine. So we'll move on to the budget work session, and with the adjustment that Superintendent Branch has suggested, Michelle, if you have some words of wisdom about the various salmon-colored sheets that you have handed out. And you do have non-salmon colored or additional salmon colored for our audience as well?
They all have They all have copies, and there are extra copies on the desk if
Excellent.
anybody else comes in.
Thank you.
So the first exciting thing that happened this week, it's been a very exciting budget week. The first thing that happened was we found out that the maximum health insurance increase is going to be 4.2%. We budgeted for 10, so that was pretty exciting. So that got me busy redoing the budget, and which is why you have most of these salmon-colored sheets, because it affected every single benefits line throughout. So I figured rather than stop you every fourth line, that it might make sense to just reprint them. The other thing that happened was, Kim had asked me to discuss the prepaid diesel, since we're cutting diesel 100% for next year. So the way that diesel works is we get a flat rate for transport. I was able to negotiate that a few years ago, and they bring by transport truck rather than a pedal truck. So we get a really good price on that. But what happens is we get a quote every year and lock in for 58,000 gallons of diesel. We pay for that diesel over the course of 10 months. So say it's $100,000, then from September through June, we pay $10,000 each month. Of course, it's more than that, but for example. So when the pandemic hit and we shut down in March, that completely stopped all diesel usage. So I knew that we were a bit ahead, and I had been talking to the person about pricing, and when he had called me back last week, he said, between FY20 and what you've used FY21, because of Wednesdays off, you have enough diesel to last you through all of next year. So we would not need to go into a contract for diesel next year, it would be the following year.
So, Michelle, is it normally if you don't use it, you lose it, but they're being nice to us? Right?
Yes, yeah, normally in that situation, if you don't use it, you lose it, but they've made an exception because of the pandemic and, multiple schools that are in this situation that it was the right thing to do. So that's the explanation on diesel. The other thing that happened was this morning, every Thursday the business managers have a meeting, and so the last couple of meetings we've been talking about budget. And one of the things that came up today was a discussion about local-only debt service. And what they said was that it's only debt service if it is construction of a new building or an addition of a building, which is not what I was told like a month ago. So a number of business managers and I jumped on and we blew up their chat asking questions. And we were told that it's only construction. So all of our new projects, the SRF program, the Siemens Phase 2 program, and the wastewater treatment plant all go back into the regular budget. However, it's removed on the revenue sheet from the local-only debt, so there's zero budget impact to that change. It was just a correction. The other thing that they happened to talk about, which was very timely, was the fact that you were not able to prepay buses if you're using the state funding mechanism, that you have to pay all 5 years in order to get the credit back for all 5 years. When I had checked with the Androscoggin Bank, I was thinking a prepayment penalty that way. It never crossed my mind that the DOE might be looking at how many payments. My thought was that they would look at the total payment. So what I had to do was change my prepayment plan, which you will see on page 3. And it just so happened that the Siemens Phase 2 project was within $2,000 of those buses. So I put the buses back in the general fund and have removed the Siemens Phase 2 project. And I'm requesting prepayment for that. So the big news on the insurance is that reduction in insurance brought us from 1.58% to 5.81% budget to budget, and from 5.27% tax impact to 3.54%.
Questions for Michelle? Michelle, do you, with the changes in the proposed items to prepay, are you feeling like we need additional action on that just to affirm that that's?
I think that's probably a good idea because of the auditor's request that it be discussed in an open meeting.
So I would take a motion to adjust our prepay plan to what's listed this evening. That was Richard and Carlos. Discussion on this? So Michelle, will that show changes in those warrant articles when you swap back?
It does. It changes the transportation warrant article from a reduction of 11.5% to a reduction of 6.67%. It changes facilities from a reduction of 15.8% to 15.64%.
Thank you.
And it also changes debt service from an increase of 49.91% to a decrease of 3.53%. That 3.53% represents just an interest reduction for the 2004B Green project.
Thank you. Other questions for Michelle? If not, in favor? Then I think again we're back to the peripheral vision. Thank you. Those things seem to be good news. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing that information. So that brings us to 4.1.1, which is the initial review of budget locations. Revisit list for 10, 11, 12, and 13. Refresh my memory on what we did not have revisit items. So that brings us directly to warrant article 6. And folks have new warrant article 6s that do reflect the change in, primarily the change in insurance. Michelle, is that what would be
Primarily
different?
the changes in benefits.
Okay,
If it's something other than that, I'll stop you and let you know.
thank you. So page 1 of 8 in warrant article 6. Questions on page 1? Crystal?
I have a question, and I can't locate it in the log here, but it was on the front page, and it was regarding summer school. Do we think that that is enough, considering where we're going, like, with the struggle, the academic struggle of the students currently? And, like, are we going to have an increase in kids needing summer school?
So the summer school trip, because we don't have credit recovery, like when our trimester 3 ends, it ends. So our summer school session will just be for those groups of students that have gaps in their math. And we've got middle schoolers who don't know the multiplication chart. Those types of skills, and we've got enough, we've got 5 staff members that will work 4 days to work with those students on those skills. In April, we're doing a grade recovery because that's the middle of trimester 3. And so the teams have gone through and prioritized the students, and the thing with that is that being April vacation, some parents are choosing not to use it. So I think we'll be fine. This is the first year that TMS has had any type of support outside of the regular school day. So I could really see us next year moving towards February vacation and April vacation, similar to the high school, to get grade recovery for trimester 2 and grade recovery for trimester 3. So at this point, I think we're going to be fine because we can fit 40 students per session, and we've got 8 sessions. So I think we'll be okay.
Yes. That's okay, no.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions on page 1? I had a quick one on Odyssey of the Mind, the first line. Seems to be up. Is that a change in what we're doing there? Or?
Which one, Kelsey?
The number on the line is 58100. Is that just a change in location, or is that?
No, that's actually an increase of some fees. Do you want to talk about that, Danielle?
There's actually a new program that we're hoping to institute called, I should have Jeff be over here talking, what's it called again?
First Lego League.
First Lego League. It's a Lego robotics club that we'd like to start, and then there's details involved in doing that.
Thank you. Other questions on page 1? Questions on page 2? Any questions on page 2? If not, moving on to page 3. Questions on page 3? Moving on to page 4. Questions on page 4? If there are no questions on page 4, we'll move on to page 5. Questions on page 5? Richard?
Could I have an explanation on line 58-100, athletics dues and fees? I know it's an only, I'm asking for information.
Sure.
What dues and fees are we paying and how much are they?
Give me a second, I can pull it up, Richard. It's like league fees, I can tell you that off the top of my head, like fees to the KVAC, and other leagues. Hang on. Okay, I've got KVAC dues, we pay annual dues to the KVAC, we pay, part of some of the fees are for entry fees to ski meets, ice time for hockey, time for indoor practice down on the turf and baits, athletic administrator conference dues, various coaches association dues, state dues for cross-country and Nordic meets, alpine, track. We have money budgeted in there for next year's winter state ski meets that are scheduled to take place in Aroostook County. So there's a fee associated with that, as you can imagine. Let's see, fees for cheering, greens fees for golf, and fees for indoor facility use for indoor track.
Thank you. Richard?
Could you give us a breakdown of those with amounts?
Sure.
Not now, but on a piece of paper,
Yep.
so we can see? I'd appreciate it.
While that's underway, are there other questions on page 5?
I don't need that tonight.
All right, I'll give it to you, Richard.
Okay.
Other questions on page 5? This is just a general question. I guess what we built in all these programs is assuming, which is always dangerous, but a more normal set of seasons presumably?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Page 6, questions on page 6. If there are no questions on page 6, move on to page 7. Fury.
What's the new fee for London Athletics 504 season plans?
That's costs associated with accommodations for a student that requires accommodations. And that's a reflection of actual expenditures. We had that expense last year as well. It's also been moved from one place to another.
So that showed up someplace else previously.
Yes. But it probably did not reflect the actual amount this one presented does.
Thank you. Other questions on page 7? Yes.
Quick question, if you could remind me, is there like a system for revolving what sport gets replacement each year? Like, is it, I feel like somebody told me that
Yeah,
one.
we tend to move it around.
Okay.
Other questions on page 7? Page 8. Moving on to page 8, or remaining on one Article 6. If not, we can move on to one Article 7. Oh no, here this is one more page. Page 101, summer school. That's where it was hiding. Other questions on the summer school page? If there are no questions on that, we will move on to warrant Article 7. Page 1 of 12 on warrant Article 7. Questions on page 1? If there are no questions on page 1, move to page. No, page 2 comes after 1. Page 2. Questions on page 2? If there are no questions on page 2, move to page 3. Yes.
On district-wide 53,300, is there a different training that's now required? That's quite an increase there. Health services, employee training.
Michelle, do you, I think,
I can pull up the list.
okay.
And the line number is 53300.
There is 6 nurses or summer institute or other training at $200, 12 AED refresher course, 24 first aid CPR, 4 staff per each building. I would have to go back to last year's to see what the difference is, but I think that.
I would assume the increase is aligning with the additional people that we have in those positions this year.
Right off the top of my head, while Michelle's looking, I think that last summer, a few of our nurses knew they were not going to participate in the Summer Institute, so therefore, we didn't budget for it because they knew they had other commitments.
We also only budgeted for 3 people to attend first aid and CPR rather than multiple people per building.
And that is on a rotational basis, so it's the actual number of people. We have a certain number of employees that we pay because we have the AED machines in each building. So that's when they are going to, when their certification's going to expire. So that would include that. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Other questions on page 3? If not, moving on to page 4. Questions on page 4? Richard?
K through 12 Staff Development Day, are we anticipating not doing that?
That's
That-
on 51511.
That is summer stipend days, and when we were making decisions about money to cut out of the budget, that was cut. It's not taking the professional development days out of the calendar. Those are additional summer days that staff can apply to do work.
So we're not going to be allowed that next year?
It would be for this summer, and no.
No. Okay.
It was just a choice to make. It's not that we don't want it or need it. It was just a choice made to reduce money.
Thank you.
Other questions on page 4? If not, moving on to page 5. Questions on page 5? Any questions on page 5? If not, moving on to page 6. Questions on page 6? Gary?
Just a general question. It looks like across all buildings, the instructional staff, employee training, I'm assuming that was another decision to cut that as well. Line 53,300 on all the schools.
Yes. We are going to be able to pay for some of that as we have this year with Title II federal funds.
Thank you.
Other questions on page 6? If not, moving on to page 7. Question on page 7. Questions on page 7?
Thank you. Am I allowed to speak about library stuff during this time, or should I save it for public comment? It's about the budget for
Yeah.
library.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. My name is Judith Lashman. I'm the librarian at Levitt. I'm also a citizen of the town of Greene, and I wanted to address the specifically the books and periodical line in all of the schools. Last year, this money was cut right at the end of the budget process, very suddenly, from all of our budgets because of issues that happened. We didn't have any input into that. At the high school, it was a 33% cut. At Tripp, it was a 37% cut. And I don't actually know the exact amount percent at the elementary schools, but they were all cut in the same dramatic fashion. So what that means is that the funding, and then that funding was continued for this year. So we were hoping that it would be reestablished back to our original amount. We have been funded for several years now at a cost of $21.50 per student. And what that allows us to do is update our collections regularly and work on building new and vibrant collections. The average price of a book for fiction at the YA level, middle school, high school, is $18.83. For nonfiction, $22.98. For graphic novels, $18.41. The children's book prices are slightly less than that. The average is $15.01 for fiction, $19.20 for nonfiction, and $18.40 for graphic novels. speaking for Levitt, the amount that I have budgeted for, that has been budgeted for me for this year is the same dollar amount that I had when I first came to Levitt 11 years ago. Obviously, the price of books has gone up. At the time, we worked hard, especially Susan Swan, who was the district elementary librarian, hard over several years to get that increase up to the $21.50 per student. I have lots of research, because of course I'm a librarian, that will explain the value of reading for kids at all levels, for vocabulary development, for general ability to succeed in school and in college and beyond. The other statistic that I just want to provide for you right now is that the average age of the collection at Levitt right now is 2005, of the books in the collection. I've been working over the last 11 years to increase that, but it's a slow process. My last collection analysis in 2018, the average age was 2003. So it's getting there. The average age of my nonfiction collection at the moment is 2001. The average age of my science collection is 2006. And because I've had the time this year, I've been working on weeding it out, and even with all that weeding. But that requires me to then be able to replace stuff. And I can't replace what I'm taking away with the budget funds that we have now. The one school does have an increase in their budget, and I can't explain that because it's at Reed Central School. I don't know how that happened, but it's still not at the $21.50. So my request is for the libraries in general, for you to think about increasing our budget. I realize asking for it to go back to what it was is more than we can expect at this point, but to flat fund it again when it was cut so dramatically, and to be able to have it at the same price it was at 11 years ago makes it pretty hard to create a vibrant and up-to-date collection that is balanced culturally and at all reading levels. Anybody have any questions?
Jessica?
I feel like I'm missing something, because when I look from the 2019 to 2020 and then 2020 to 21, am I missing where the cut was?
So what happened is the library books were one of the things that took a hit in June at the last round of cuts.
Oh, so it's not reflected in...
So it's not, you would have to look at the prior year, and as far as green, that was supposed to have been cut, so that was my mistake.
So, Michelle, can you step us through what those lines are then? Because
Sure.
I'm with Jessica, I'm a little confused because when I look at TPS 564,
Yep, so it's going to be 56400 in each of them,
right?
and I can tell you how much we've cut if that would be helpful.
So, but we're working off of a current adopted budget, right?
Yes. Right, so the current
Yes.
adopted was the one that was cut from the previous year.
Right.
That cut at the end of the budget process last year, and then this
Okay.
year it's the same amount rather than going back to what it had been first.
But,
I think 2000.
but that doesn't, so if I look at prior actual 19 and 20, for example, with TPS,
Yep.
$2,096.30, current adopted $3,870
Right.
and 65 cents, and this year's
So,
number matches that.
right, so if you look at the prior actual for 2019-20,
Mhm.
on most of them, it looks like, that doesn't look too bad compared to what happened in the next year. The explanation for that is that the budget froze before they had time to spend all of their allocation. Both the elementary district librarian that year and the thrift librarian were brand new in their positions that year. So they didn't, like I always work hard to make sure that I have my budget spent by December. They saved a lot of their money because there's a program that they do that the list doesn't even come out till the spring, and so they weren't as savvy about being able to spend that money, so it froze before they could spend it. So that amount isn't what they had to be able to spend. They lost quite a bit actually, which was a problem.
Other questions on this? So So I guess I'm having some difficulty getting a sense of what the magnitude of this is, or what the actual figure is that we're talking about, because it certainly doesn't appear to show up on that line necessarily when we look at the comparative figures in front of us.
I've got it. The amount per Levitt, I don't have a calculator right now, but at like 560 students times 2150 a student, so it was 12,000 something. Historically, over the last several years, if you look at the same line on page 10, the LAHS prior actual in 2019 was 12,901, so it was somewhere between 12 and 14,000 every year, depending on the number of students we have.
Thank you.
And again, it varies per school. And I think there was always some kind of extra stipend at Leeds because it's such a small student body, but they're doing pre-K to 6. So it was a minimum, I think, amount at that school, particularly because of need. And it was, again, it was a fairly old collection for quite a while. I can go through what was cut at each of the schools if that would be helpful from our original budget this year.
Sure, but I mean, yes, that would be helpful, but I guess I'm not sure what that, yes, that would be helpful. Thank you.
TPS is $1,754.35. That's on page 7. Page 8, TES was $2,308.
Could you speak up and speak slower, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
$2,308 for TES. GCS, it would have been $22.17, but I didn't cut it.
But you said it should be cut,
Right,
so that should read zeros.
right. LCS, $2,034.22. Tripp Middle School, $1,980.89. And the high school, $4,109.80.
So the
Clearly, I think that, but I wouldn't be able to figure out how to turn it back on again. So the total figure, if we add all those together, Michelle, was somewhere in that 12,000
It's right around 12,000.
range. Jessica,
Could I make a motion that we put that on the revisit list?
I'll second.
so we have a motion and a second, and what you're wanting to put on the revisit list is that books, and it's specifically books.
Books and periodical line.
Books and periodicals.
So it's the books and periodicals line, that 56400 for all locations.
Correct.
All those in favor of putting that on the revisit list? Those opposed? That was unanimous. So we'll add that to our revisit list. Thank you. And I think we were on page 7. Other questions on page 7? Jerry?
Does it help, I think, to put that funding back to where it was originally in 1920 would be about $7,300 on top of what's budgeted.
Thank you. Other questions on page 7? not, moving on to page 8. Questions on page 8? If there are no questions on page 8, moving on to page 9. Questions on page 9? If there are no questions on page 9, moving on to page 10. Questions on page 10? Any questions on page 10? If not, moving on to page 11. Questions on page 11? Gary?
On 56,500 LAHS technology supplies, that's up quite a lot from last year.
Want me to address that, Lisa? I can address that, Yuri. It's for Chromebook cases. They went up $17 each this year. Technology's gone through the roof.
Thank you.
Other questions on page 11? If not, moving on to page 12. Questions on page 12? Any questions on page 12? If not, that brings us to the conclusion of warrant article 7. And we have the one item that we added to the revisit list, I believe. And the two warrant article 8. Page 1, warrant article 8. Questions on page 1?
That's it.
Richard?
58,100, school board dues and fees. I asked Kim a couple of meetings ago, that includes our membership in MSMA.
Yes.
How much do we pay a year
A
for that?
little, I think it's $5,400. I think it's $5,400 a year for everybody.
Thank you.
What,
Other questions on page 1?
what do we get for our $5,400?
So I included a little bit of information in here, Richard, because you had asked me that question. So the MSBA does the advocacy with legislation. Of course, you've been part of the resolutions, which is part of that advocacy every single year. Thank you for that as well. They're also a resource for help and support for the board, as well as for, I use them as well. I use the superintendent side of it.
Is that an increase on those dues? Is that where the increase in that line is coming from?
It is, there was a pretty good sized chunk. We get a letter every year that tells us what the dues are going to be, and that's how much it increased.
It's a 5,400,
Up to 59.73.
59,700.
Thank you. Other questions on page 1? Moving on to page 2. Questions on page 2? Questions on page 2? If there are no questions on page 2, move to page 3. Question on page 3. If there are no questions on page 3, that would bring us to the conclusion of warrant article 8. We move to warrant article 9, and that is school administration. Questions on page 1? Questions on page 1? There are no questions on page 1. Moving to page 2. Questions on page 2? 54310, equipment repairs / something that's cut off.
It's equipment repair is an agreement. That is the price per copy, and we get charged so much per copy. And I based that on this year's actual, the pandemic, the younger grades had a lot of photocopying.
Thank you. Other questions on page 2? Moving on to page 3. Questions on page 3? Any questions on page 3? Moving on to page 4 then. Oh no, sorry, here. Budget again.
52,540, what went away for LCS, principal's office tuition / something?
There were.
I got my doctorate.
Yeah, she's not taking any classes.
I'm done.
Thank you. Other questions on page 3? Moving on to page 4. Questions on page 4? Questions on page 4? If there are no questions on page 4, we move to page 5. Questions on page 5? If there are no questions on page 5, move to page 6, which is the summary page. Any questions remaining on warrant article 9? If not, we can move to warrant article 20, and that is about that. Questions on page 1? If there are no questions on page 1, move to page 2. Questions on page 2? No questions on page 2, we'll move to page 3. Questions on page 3? There are no questions on page 3, move to page 4. Questions on page 4? There are no questions on page 4. Move to page 5. Questions on page 5? Any questions on page 5? If not, that brings us to the completion of our review of warrant article 20. Item 4.2 is a reminder that our next budget work session is April 1st, which seems risky, at the high school. We will review the revisit list, and these first two items seem a little redundant because we'll revisit everything on any remaining revisit things. And then we will look to adopt the final proposed Brings us to items. Do you have any other reminders or anything for us on that, Tim? I think that's fairly self-explanatory. Brings us to other. We don't have any other items, I don't believe. Brings us to item 5, adjustments to the agenda.
Yes, we do not need agenda item 10.7, which is an executive session for ESP, nor do we need 10.8, which is the action as needed related to that item.
Thank you. Brings us to committee reports. Finance, Yuri.
We have not met.
PTB, that would be me, and we have not met. Curriculum policy, Joanne.
We have not met either.
Thank you. Olivia.
Hello, good evening. Tonight I wanted to use my time to kind of address some concerns and questions that I've heard from students and families about possibly moving to a different schedule, whether that be a 3-day schedule or a 4-day schedule, as well as end of the year activities. And just whoever is able to answer those questions, that would be excellent. So first, there's some concerns from students, especially at the high school, that if we were to move to a 3 or 4-day schedule, whether that be within some or all schools, that this would affect their work schedules for sophomores, juniors, and seniors, as well as possibly taking care of younger siblings in other schools. That would require either those students to go into childcare if older siblings aren't able to take care of them, or to possibly find, a family member to take care of them, which might not be possible for a lot of families. And also kind of their schedules that they have followed for the entire year, kind of their lives being turned a little bit upside down and having to reschedule all of their activities and their work and family matters and such. So that's kind of the feedback that I've heard. I haven't heard a strong opposing that students don't necessarily want to go back to school, but they're enjoying the way the school year is going so far and would prefer to remain on that schedule for the remainder of the year. I've also heard some students who have said that they would like the Wednesdays remote to continue through next year and possibly in the future. And they're wondering if that's something that would be possible. Another thing that some people have brought to my attention is that they're wondering how much one more month of returning to school how much that actually is going to benefit students, and whether that's actually going to create more chaos, and as some of the points that I mentioned in my first topic, whether that's going to actually create more chaos or if it's going to benefit students in any way. There's also been some senior students and families who have asked me if we do return to a 4-day or 3-day schedule, why can't some of the end of the year activities such as graduation also be more normalized? I have been able to speak with Mr. Shaw about some of these things. He might be able to give you more information on that. And then lastly, our students especially at the elementary and middle school, will they be ready to move on to the next grade level, having missed the in-person instruction from the end of last year as well as the entirety of this year, if they're up to grade level in reading and math, and if they'll be ready to move on to the next grade. That's just some of the questions and concerns that I've heard. If Ms. Fran, if you're able to touch on any of those during your report, that would be excellent. Or Mr. Shaw or any other building principals as well.
Thanks, Olivia. Those are excellent questions, and it's definitely helpful for us to hear the student perspective as well. You eased us into this slowly last time we talked about Winter Carnival, and this time you're pretty right to the point on your questions, so thank you. That's much appreciated. And certainly if either Mr. Shaw or Superintendent Brand, if you'd like to touch on some of those things right now, or as Olivia alluded, if that's something that works better in either administrator report or the superintendent's report, and certainly those are all questions that are part of our discussions as well.
So I plan to do some of my report, but I'm glad to do right now. But you asked your first question, Olivia. What was your very first question?
I talked about the students' concerns about going back in a new schedule, but also there were some questions about whether we could keep Wednesdays as a remote day going forward in following years, even with restrictions being lifted.
Right, okay. So, these are all real good questions. So what's happening is that the governor has started with restrictions in terms of indoor and outdoor gatherings and travel restrictions as well. The data's looking better in terms of numbers of cases. They're not high like they were at some point. And the national CDC has now changed. They've been steadfast on the 6 feet distancing. And now they have said that 3 foot with all masks on is okay. So at this point, we have a situation where we have required distancing has to happen. And that is, if students have masks on, they can be 3 feet apart. However, as soon as anybody has a mask off, they have to be 6 feet apart. Adults need to be 6 feet apart and 6 feet apart from students as well. So it's a bit of a puzzle, right, that way. So we have put out a survey to our families, that went out this morning, actually, asking our families how they feel about the idea of finding some options for more in-person instruction this year. So we're going to get that survey back. We've asked for people to finish with that by Monday. We already have over 500 results, 500 responses to that. So quite a few responses already. And we have an open question at the end for anything else that anybody would want to tell. So that will be very good data for us to look at as well. And I just remember what your first question was, and then I kept talking after that.
Whether it would be possible to keep Wednesdays as a remote day.
It's something else you asked. It'll come back again. So in any case, we'll have that data to take a look at as well. So really what we're thinking is our goal would always be to have students in as much as we can in instruction. I remember you asked if it would be consistent across all schools. It will not be consistent across, whatever options we're able to come up with will not be consistent because it will depend on the size of each school and the number of students in that school. So if you have a school that's larger, and maybe not quite as many students, there may be more options. If you have a school that is pretty full with not a lot of extra space, that won't be an option to have all students back in at all. So we are looking at ideas right now. We've been doing measuring. Principals have been talking to their staff as well. Some of the concerns that you brought up are concerns that some staff have voiced as well, as far as it's a lot of change for a relatively short period of time this spring. I agree, it is a lot of change for a short period of time this spring. However, I want to make sure I hear from parents and I want to hear from our principals and their staff about what options might make sense for us, because we want to get kids in more if we can get kids in more. Plus, we have to keep in mind that all of us, and I'm leading this, are feeling like next fall's got to be normal, right? It's got to be. We've got to have all kids back in 5 days a week. There can't be any more requirements. We've got to move forward. However, we don't know that for sure yet. So anything that we are able to do this spring as far as options go will help us learn and help with planning if we find ourselves in a situation where we can't have all kids in next fall 5 days a week. Now, we're all truly hoping that doesn't happen. But if we can have more kids in for any period of time, what does that look like? Did it work? What was good about that? What did we find out? In the survey that we sent to parents this morning, we actually included all the different things we might have to consider as we're looking at options. And they're things that we normally wouldn't do. Things like your child may be having lunch or breakfast on the floor in the hallway in order to make the distancing possible. Your child may have to change a teacher, right, for the rest of the year. So there are a lot of, and busing is another one. So there's a lot there that we need to hear back from our families about. I am guessing that we're going to hear from most families to say, please, whatever you can do would be a good thing. Have children back with each other, have them with their peers more often, learning the instruction in person. That is really great, right? That is working really well. So we want to do that. So we haven't made any decisions at this point. We know it's a big undertaking, and we know that it means a lot of change in a year that has had a lot of change. We also will imagine that we'll hear from parents any of the concerns about caring for younger siblings as well, right? So more to come on that. What the plan is to be able to talk to the board on April 1st, which is just next week, about what we've come up with for possible options and have that discussion at that time. Now, as far as Wednesday's remote going forward, so I always like to listen to any ideas and think about what are the merits of that. What I would say right now, my first gut feeling is if we can get kids back in 5 days, I want kids back in 5 days. Right, I really do. We're going to have to look at any kind of learning gaps and take care of those for students. And then you said, what about students moving to the next grade level? Yes, we're going to do that, and we're going to put structures in place to support students in filling those learning gaps. And anything else that you said on that?
This is something I've talked to Mr. Shaw about, but I've had a lot of questions from senior parents and families about end of the year activities. I know that I've spoken with him and he's going to come out with more information on that soon, but just they're a little bit concerned, or confused, I should say, about if there is a possibility of going back to school these 4 days a week, why can't other outside activities be more possible for students to take part in?
So Mr. Shaw Principal Shaw is working on that as well. So the thing is that's hard about this is that, and I feel confident saying for every single person who works in MSAD 52, we would love to have things back to normal. We would love to have students in 5 days. We'd love activities to resume fully. We'd love to have graduation be just like it's always been able to be. We would love for all those things to happen. We'll have to continue looking at the requirements and what is feasible. I give Principal Shaw a lot of credit because he has started early this year with area principals to say, what can we do? What can we do to make this work, considering we're still in the pandemic? So there has been a lot of work to make something good for our students in this situation. However, as things loosen up and change, we continue to look at what we're doing to do the best we can by students.
Thank you. Excellent questions that I'm sure will lend themselves into this continuing discussion on April 1st as well. 6.5, non-teaching negotiations, AFSCME and ESP. Jessica.
We have not met.
Thank you. Administrators report, building principals.
All that's planned. So we started trimester 3, and trimester 2 report cards were mailed home last week. This week we're doing Spirit Week, so Tuesdays and Fridays the theme is Disney characters, and Tuesday I came as Sorcerer Mickey from head to toe, and I won for the staff. Thank you. No one else really came close, but that's okay. So tomorrow I won't compete to give them a chance. Next week we're going to start something totally new. It's called March Mayhem. The TMS Tigers are about to partake in some friendly competition. TMS March Mayhem will take place from March 29th to April 2nd. The Bengals, Siberians, and Wildcats will face off in a series of events and activities throughout the day, fighting for the Mayhem Trophy and, of course, bragging rights. Each group will have the opportunity to earn 100 points towards their team's total every period. Activities and events will be content-related and encourage team building and collaboration to work for a common goal. Students can also earn points through spirit wear by dressing in their team colors, and staff can earn points through the trivia in between periods. It is our hope that the TMS March Mayhem will be a change both student and staff need to focus on relationship building, mental wellness, and re-spark school engagement. And on top of that, Mrs. Newton, our guidance counselor, has been going out and visiting the elementary schools to help the 6th graders prepare for their transition into trip. Any questions? Thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple of items. I've got a couple more now that Olivia's asking questions, but I've got a couple to start with. First of all, as you already know, we are working remotely this week. We have been since Tuesday, since the end of the day on Monday. Once again, staff and students on a dime went to remote work and seem to be moving along or progressing as well as we hoped. As we do that, and with plans to come back to our normal hybrid model starting on Monday. This was to be the last week of quarter three. Because we have not been in the building, I will be end of the quarter next week. So we'll have one more week with kids in the building before we end quarter three. And then we'll start quarter four the following week. Additionally, spring sports, I think maybe this came up last time, I can't remember, but spring sports will be starting next week as well. And again, as normal as they can be. Baseball, softball will have traditional season, and we'll have bands that are doing our best to maintain distance. And there'll be some changes though. If you happen to stop by a baseball or a softball game, I don't think you're going to see an umpire behind the pitcher. I think the umpire is going to be behind the pitcher. And I'm pretty sure that everybody's going to be wearing a mask. So it'll look a little weird out there, but nonetheless, we'll be out there. Additionally, with track, working on ways to keep groups together, and it's going to sound strange, but together but separate at the same time. And conducting a track meet is difficult on a good day, never mind mixing. It's kind of nice. So Ms. LaRoche and Mr. Genturo are working diligently on that. In regard to a couple of Olympia's questions, end-of-year activities, we're working on them to be as normal as they can be, given the circumstance that we're in. And Mrs. Wright doesn't know this yet. She's going to know right now. Actually, graduation is an agenda item for her and I tomorrow. So that'll be something that we discuss further and look at. One of the factors that we have to keep in mind is all of the guidance that we currently have says with a little asterisk next to it, conditions allowing. And what we can't do is get to Memorial Weekend and have somebody tell us that conditions no longer allow that. So we need to do something that's going to allow for whatever conditions exist at the time. And at the same time, people need to be booked or they're going to do something else. So we're having to do this now, wondering what's going to happen the first week in June. Complicating that is that we're one of several area high schools vying for the same vendors. So we have to work together to try to make that work. And we have been doing that. And after talking with a few of them today, and I will talk with Mrs. Grant tomorrow, we should have some direction in regards to graduation after that. Let's see. I think that's what I have for tonight. Any questions? Thank you.
I have the great pleasure of giving the report for the elementary schools. We met this afternoon and collaborated, so I'm going to read from this. One of the first things I want to let you know that the Title I schools are planning a Title I parent night. It will be held virtually. Just a reminder that our school-wide Title I schools include Turner Primary, Leeds Central, and Green Central School, and Turner Elementary School is considered a targeted Title I. In school-wide schools, all students needing support receive the benefits. In a targeted school, we've chosen to use these resources to support our third graders, and more information will be sent out to families as the date approaches. Schools are in the midst of accepting new student registration, including pre-kindergarten. The online registration form can be found on our district website, msad52.org. Parents of incoming pre-K students will receive additional information from the school office once the initial registration has been completed. If families have any questions, please call their school offices. Schools are also beginning to discuss transitions and end-of-the-year celebrations, like Mr. Shaw alluded to at the high school. Students in grades 3 through 6 will be participating in our statewide assessment system for reading, language, and math, and 5th graders will be assessed on science. The state has adopted the NWEAs, which luckily our district has used already, for students in K through 8 and 9 and 10, but now we're adding 11. The new science is called Meridian Science, and next week the elementary school principals will be working on the administration rollout for staff, students, and families. So more information is coming on that. Discussions are happening at each of the schools about what school could look like. Olivia, you had some questions, and I know Superintendent Brandt alluded to the fact that we're hearing from many staff about these discussions, including some of the logistical challenges and how to work through those. And as the weather is getting nicer, our students and staff are able to spend more time outdoors. I'm sure many of you are doing as well. And that's what I have for our elementary schools. Any questions?
Brings us to superintendent's report. Kim.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you for that. All right, so this morning I was able to meet with our town managers, so Kurt Shaw from Turner, Joyce Pratt from Leeds, and Darlene Bollier from Green. And we have a pattern of meeting a couple times each year, just to discuss what's happening in the school district as well as what's happening in the towns, and it's helpful to share that information. This time of year, we always meet so that we can, I can answer any questions about the budget process and what we have as a proposed budget and things that might impact towns and back and forth. So we did that this morning. It was nice to see everybody. We actually did meet in person. We were far away, but there were only 4 of us, so I could hear them. And they asked some questions about the budget. Kurt shared that Turner is doing a revaluation, so that will probably make a change coming up for next year. Joyce talked about broadband in Leeds, a lot of areas that still don't have that connectivity. And Green, Darlene talked about the fact that they're hoping to have maybe a little bit more business coming in, a grocery store perhaps, and a fast food store and a gas station as well. So it was good to have those conversations. I did get asked about the federal emergency relief funding and if any of that could be used to offset the general budget. And so I did have the opportunity to explain that the emergency federal relief funding is specific for items that are impacted by COVID, and it cannot be used to supplant the budget. So we can't say, well, we're going to take this much and just put it toward the general budget. It's not allowed. We also can't use it for things that are always in the budget. So the example I gave, I think last week, was that every year we purchase Chromebooks for the incoming freshmen. Because we do that every year, we can't now use the federal emergency relief money to purchase those Chromebooks. However, we've made choices and decisions that are good for our students and staff in our district right now and will continue to be good for us for years going into the future. And although we can't supplant the general budget, some of the planning and decisions that the administrative team made will, over time, show up as not being things that we have to ask for in the budget. So some examples of those kinds of things would be custodial equipment. We bought a lot of custodial equipment with the federal relief funding. So for example, this year, there's a $30,000 decrease in the budget because we don't have to ask for that equipment because we bought it to do the deep cleaning during the pandemic. We were able to do some minor capital improvements that could be showing up in budgets now or in the future. We had a $20,000 decrease in furniture as a result of needing to buy furniture through the emergency funding. We bought vans. That would save us $13,000 of what we would have asked for in this proposed budget. Also a truck for plowing, and that represents a savings of some money, and that replaced a plower and sander, I believe. That's what that was. So other things that we purchased, like we improved the infrastructure in all the schools. And that is something that we've been wanting to do for a long time. Hasn't been in the budget yet, but it would eventually be, and now it doesn't have to be because we're in good shape for a number of years. the devices for students, that's supporting students now, but it's also going to support education going forward for several years. And it does not impact the general budget for several years as well. We did phone upgrades across the district as a result of needing to make sure we had the good communication going. We had some HVAC improvements done at TMS and at the high school. We did buy classroom library books. We need to have more books for classroom libraries, and those are things that would have shown up in the budget that did not. So even though we can't supplant the budget, we made decisions that would benefit students and the district now that actually show up as things we're not going to have to request in our budget, in our general budget going forward. So I think that that's important to note as well. So Olivia's good questions means that I'm going to try not to be redundant as I say this next part. But as you know, we had the re-entry team get together to brainstorm what more can we do for our students and our staff, and in particular for those students who are struggling with remote learning. And Teresa reported out on some of the ideas from the re-entry team. The entire district knows that principals have been working with their staff to measure spaces again, to take a look at what else might we be able to do as far as options for some increased in-person instruction. We are having storage containers delivered, they're already at the high school and middle school, but to the elementary schools, because we moved all this furniture out of classrooms to make room for this year. Now we're storing that in different places in the school, sometimes in the gym. We're going to move all that to those containers, so that opens up a little bit more space as well. And principals have, on Tuesday, the principal group, along with Rebecca and Teresa, worked together to start thinking about ideas related to what we discovered from measuring spaces and what more space we might have. Principals then went back to their schools to talk to their staff about ideas and what might work. Some staff are saying, okay, we can do this, and there are some staff who have voiced some of the same concerns that Olivia brought up as well, in terms of a lot of change and disruption to a kind of a routine that we're in for a short period, relatively short period of time. And I don't disagree with that at all. I think that that is true. I also think that if we can support our students in any way, that I want us to try to move forward to do that. And again, because we're so hopeful that next year will be normal, but anything we do this spring will help us learn more and support planning in case we can't be completely normal next year. This morning, as I said, a survey went out to families asking for their feedback and input on ideas and giving them some conditions that may have to be in place if we are able to make some options. It depends on each school and the number of students, what the options might be. So they won't be consistent school to school, right? It really depends on the space and the number of students. Again, no decisions have been made whatsoever. We're just thinking and working really hard to see what we might be able to do. We'll be bringing our ideas to the board on next Thursday on April 1st. We're also working with transportation because busing is also a possible barrier. We still have the distancing requirements on buses, and we can't fit more than 23 children on a bus at this point. So we have families who are transporting, but it's a real puzzle to try to figure out how we would accommodate additional students in transportation. So there are a lot of pieces to this we have to work on. I think I mentioned last year that Dave Roberts, Food Service, had said he stands at the ready to figure out anything that we need to happen. So I have no doubt that we have a team that will make it happen if it can happen. It's just a matter of what will that look like and what is possible. So Evan told you already that we currently have 5 positive cases at the high school, and the high school is closed for this week, but in-person resumes again on Monday. Green Central School had a case that resulted in a very large number of close contacts among staff. So GCS is fully remote and returned to in-person instruction April 1st. Correct, Doug? And Doug, thank you for all your work on that as well. And we know that we're going to be getting some of the American Rescue Plan, the ARC Act. We're going to be getting another round of funding, federal emergency relief funding. The state is getting about $411 million, and about 90% of that has to go to schools. So they're figuring out allocations, and we're supposed to find out what those allocations will be this week. So I'm hoping that tomorrow will be Lucky Friday. There are some parameters around that. We don't know what all those are at this time, but we do know that 20% of whatever allocation we receive will need to be spent addressing learning loss. So putting structures in place to support students as we go forward. And then Michelle actually has a very short update on the wastewater treatment plant.
Yes, so at a recent PTB meeting, I had noted, I think it was a PTB meeting, I had noted that we needed to do a fiscal sustainability plan that was going to cost $20,000. I have done some research on that, and there is a grant that's available for us to apply for that would pay up to $10,000 of that. So I will be working with Wright Pierce to apply for that grant. And the other $10,000 can come out of the bond anticipation note, and Betsy and Kim will be signing those documents tomorrow to go back to Drummond Woodsum.
Thank you. That brings us to public comment. Do we have public wishing to comment? Going once. Going twice. Everyone's shy this evening. Fanatic.
I didn't really have a comment, but I could add to what you were saying about the buses. It's kind of a compound problem because in addition to the fact that we can only have about 24 students on a full bus, we don't have enough bus drivers to add in more runs that we currently have, per se. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there.
Nothing is simple this year.
No.
Thank you. If there's nothing for public comment, we'll move on to old business, which we don't have any of. So we'll try the consent agenda. I would entertain a motion. Carlos, do you have a second?
Yes.
Richard, all those in favor? Unanimous? That brings us to new business. Our first item of new business is to report the completion of the probationary period for the following employees. Brent Barker, district-wide van driver, and that's March 12th. Robin Ellingwood, district-wide bus driver, and that's March 12th as well. Brings us to item 10.2. First and second reading and adoption of policy GBP, Earned Paid Leave and Regulations, GBPR.
So move.
Second.
Richard and Carlos. Discussion on this one. I assume this is time sensitive given that it's first and second reading?
Yes, that's correct. Because the law actually started in January, so we're just implementing a policy, and the Curriculum Policy Committee reviewed it, and then I met with Michelle and Kim to make sure that all the procedures would be put in place, which they are.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this one? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous? 10.3, first reading and acceptance of revised policy IHBG, homeschooling.
So moved.
Second.
And that was Carlos and Richard. Discussion on this one? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous? 10.4, first reading and acceptance of revised policy IHBGA, homeschooling, participation in school programs.
So moved.
Second.
Carlos, Richard, discussion on this one? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous? Item 10.5, first reading and acceptance of revised policy JLDBG, reintegration of students from juvenile correctional facilities.
So moved.
Second.
Carlos, Richard, discussion on this one? Great.
I assume this is to meet new statute.
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to hear you.
Is this to meet a change in state statute?
No, I think there was just an updated policy. It hadn't been reviewed, if I'm thinking correctly, since 2014, so 7 years ago. And there were some specifics that were in the updated policy we wanted to make sure were in ours.
Thank you. Other discussion on this one? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. 10.6, first reading and acceptance of revised policy JRA, student education records and information, regulation JRA-R, and exhibit JRA-E.
Second.
Carlos and Richard. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. And we didn't need 10.7 and 10.8. So unless we have any other items of business we need to take up for this meeting tonight, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Carlos and Richard. All those in favor?